法會主席。
The President of the Legislative Council. I've received inquiries from different parties and alliances in relation to today's arrangements. I noticed that this is the last meeting of the year. I expect that as far as this debate is concerned, probably it will come to a close later in this afternoon. On Tuesday, I had talked to different parties. That is, after completing this debate, I would not be starting the second debate so that the second debate can take place on one occasion at the next meeting. Mr. Hon Chang. Mr. President, first of all, let me say this for the record. That is, right before the break, Mr. Leung Chi-Cheng spoke, and in his speech, he mentioned that for June 12, it started the Black Terror in Hong Kong. I agree very much with him. That's the prelude. I could see that on that day, protesters pried all the bricks from the pavement. They were ready. And then one by one, the bricks were thrown at the police. For the police cordon line, we could see that they were retreating all the time. They were retreating under the drum of our electoral complex, faced with the bricks thrown at them, as well as other weapons like the metal poles, etc. The violence rightly fit the categorization of a riot. So on that day, that was the violence used to attack the police. And the electoral complex was under siege as well. Therefore, I totally believe that it was a riot. It was a riotous clash. Mr. President, today and yesterday, many members accused the police of using excessive force in response. As I have just said, on that day, just on that day alone, what happened was that there were many people who were rioters, and they pried the bricks in advance. They got themselves ready to start the violent clash. So what did we expect the police to do in response? Folding their arms, sitting idle? That would have been most unreasonable. So we need to look at the facts, and we have to be clear about the truth, and we mustn't shirk the responsibility onto the police. I need to make this point right in the beginning. Mr. President, for the past 6 months, we lived in an era of black terror. Recently, I asked a question at one of our meetings. I asked for the past 6 months how many police officers were injured as a result of being on duty during such events, and how many of them have been hurt. A total of 483 of them. That's the answer. Some were burned with corrosive fluids. Some were hit by hard objects, iron poles, arrows and bows, as well as makeshift weapons. Mr. President, if it is said that for the past 6 months, for the tactics deployed by the police, if it is said that it's an excessive use of force, then I beg the question. That is, when the protesters were using corrosive fluids to burn our police officers were hit with iron poles and arrows and bows and petrol bombs, and individual police officers were also hurt in such a way that their neck was slashed. It was almost fatal. And not just police officers, the other citizens were also hurt, like a man was set on fire just because he held different political views. And petrol bombs were also thrown at a nanny bus carrying young children. A cleansing worker was cleaning up the road blockade, and unfortunately, he was killed when a brick was thrown at him. In the light of all such, what do we expect the police to do in response? Should they just do nothing at all? Well, the black terror is threatening our personal safety when we go out. In fact, the economy has come to a standstill. Different sectors and industries are suffering. Many people, as a result of the 6-month turmoil, have lost their jobs and have lost their means of living. Shops have to close. Shops have been vandalized. Many of them were being targeted, all because you were in support of the police or you are a Chinese-funded enterprise, or you have shown yourselves to be in favor of the pro-establishment camp views. So everybody has to live in fear day in, day out. Let me put this question to the opposition camp. For such acts of malice, can you turn a blind eye to it? Every time we have asked you to distance yourselves from violence, they said that no, they would not. And they even came up with all sorts of grand excuses to legitimize the acts of violence. All we have got in return to our questions has been that in response to police brutality, they have to use force. In other words, they are shifting the blame onto the police. This is unfair, Mr. President. Let me say this. I'm repeating myself, in fact. As politicians, the opposition camp members have this responsibility, have this duty to lead the public opinion and play the role of a mediator. No, they didn't. In fact, on the contrary, they were inciting the protesters to accept violence, and they explained away the violence. As a result, the citizens followed their incitement, and they didn't mind the escalation of violence, and therefore Hong Kong has degenerated into this state. Now, for the opposition camp members in this chamber, they should be held accountable. But then I don't see any hint of admission of guilt or that they find it wrong. On the contrary, for what happened in the past 6 months, the opposition camp members are trying to invoke the powers and privileges of the LegCo to start inquiries. As I have said, Mr. President, we have had 6 months of black terror. I think we need to carry out an overall review so as to find out about the causes as well as the inadequacies as well as the deep-seated conflicts. We should take a broad view instead of following the advice of the wording in the motions. Now, some members would like to invoke the powers and privileges. I think they won't deny that they are trying to target the police by invoking the powers and privileges. I can't agree with them. Now, the government has said that perhaps we should follow the model of the UK in finding about the causes of a social unrest. So I think we need a review committee so that we find out about the causes, the inadequacies, and the deep-rooted problems. That should be the forum to do so. Now, the opposition camp would like to have inquiry for each and every incident. I don't know how long the queue will become, and our resources are limited. It is just an impossible task. And at the same time, I don't think we should be unfair to the police and pinpoint their work. If the police have fallen below their standards, or if individual police officers have made mistakes, I think we can just adopt the established mechanism and rely on the IPCC. The IPCC's report hasn't been published, and I think we need to be fair to the Council as well, and we need to read the report before we come to our judgment. Next, some members have been saying this all the time. By having a committee of inquiry, we can resolve all the problems. Mr. President, well, we have had this for 6 months. My question is, can we really have a committee of inquiry which is independent, and then we can quell all the unrest and end the turmoil? I ask this question. This is because in the past, in June, I think there was an attempt to make concessions. Well, in fact, in June, there was an announcement to suspend the amendment exercise in relation to the Fugitive Offenders Bill. Now, the opposition camp said that they would not accept it, saying that they distrust the government, and they were mindful about the wording used. Well, now at that time, it was said that the bill would be suspended, and later on, there was a formal withdrawal of the bill. I don't think they have included this when it comes to their 5 demands. So in the past, there were compromises and concessions. Despite all such, the opposition camp would not stop the dissatisfaction that they have tried to provoke. Now, I have this very reasonable conclusion. That is, must we accede to the request, have a COI, and then we can resolve everything? I think it will be difficult. At the same time, President, we need to handle the unrest. It is indeed that in the past 6 months, the SL government didn't do an adequate job. Say, for example, failure to coordinate all the departments to stop violence and restore order. The police were on their own. They were at the front line. They risked their lives. And what about the other departments? Where have they gone? I think the government should bear some responsibility in this regard. Secondly, for our judiciary, for a time being, the courts failed to dispose of the cases efficiently and quickly. In the UK, they got a 24-hour court, speedy prosecution, speedy trial, etc. They're able to deal with the cases in a week's time. But what about us in Hong Kong? We have been pleading for a special court round the clock to deal with the cases. The administration turned a deaf ear to this. There are many cases waiting to be dealt with. It takes time to charge the offenders, and it takes time to list the cases. Many arrestees are on bail. Many citizens would like to see the prosecution work being done speedily and efficiently, and then there will be a deterrent effect, and then we can stop people going out. No, the government hasn't done that, and it is in fact an issue the government should face squarely and seriously. Next, for 6 months, we have had a large number of fake news, news that have not been substantiated, and lies that have been allowed to spread. For example, for August 31st, right in the beginning, it was alleged that quite a large number of people died. And then the rumor just spread repeatedly. Now, people came to believe that a lot of people died on that night. What about the debunking of the myth? Now, we have got a lot of fake news, a lot of scaremongering, and the facts have been stood on their heads. But what about the response of the administration? There isn't an effective mechanism to deal with the fake news. I think it is important for the government to review the arrangements. Mr. President, I really hope that in this debate we can bring out a clear message. As far as the police performance in the past 6 months is concerned, the police officers are risking their lives to deal with the riots, and every time the opposition camp would say that the violence should be the violence was caused by the police. So they're trying to divert our attention. I don't care what excuse, what reason you have got. You should never resort to violence. But then the opposition camp are trying to ask for inquiries of all sorts, and they condone violence. Now, we are in big trouble, and a lot of people, as a result of the 6-month Black Terror, have lost their jobs. They have lost the means of living. Their households are in financial difficulties. I just wondered if the opposition camp has ever considered such hardship. If they allow or if they condone violence to continue, businesses will be hurt. Have they turned a blind eye to the vandalism caused to the shops? Even Eddie Chu himself has said that we have got Hong Kong people revenge appearing on a banner. Does it mean that that's the only words that he would care for in his mind? Probably that's why we have such serious turmoil in Hong Kong.
Wang Ting-Kwang. Thank you, President. Well, they have 3 members who would like to invoke the electrical PNP Ordinance to appoint a select committee in accordance to the Basic Law, Article 23, to summon the Commissioner for Police to investigate that on June 12th, the enforcement actions outside the electrical complex. So it's mainly singled out the police in its riot operations and every time, whether it's lawful or unlawful protests, they would start to stir up trouble after the meeting, which forced the police to act in order to maintain law and order. Well, the police with maintain law and order is doing a righteous job. Why? With the motions they're asking to investigate the police, but not on the rioters who are disrupting the peace. Of course, if we have an investigation, it must include the mastermind behind the so-called no big stage movement, and whether it investigate have colluded with foreign political forces. And in 6 months, in half months' time, we'll embark into year 2020, where we have a new start. To shake off the gloom for the past 6 months and to do something constructive for Hong Kong, where should we focus our attention? Thus, these 3 motions were meaningless and unnecessary. The wording of the motion accused the police will use excessive force towards the protesters holding an lawful assembly, whether the police abuse their powers in enforcing its powers. For example, shooting the head of the protesters, beating protesters with batons, and assaulting for reporters. However, the violence unleashed by the rioters, they chose not to held accountable. Well, they have all this biased narrative of the police is unfair. On that day, I was at the electrical complex. I'm also watching the live streaming and the media. Well, at the 5th floor balcony, I saw it from the start to finish. I know thoroughly of how the protesters charged the electrical complex, so I would have the most authority on speaking about what happened According to the timeline, at around 7 to 8 in the morning, the peoples were occupying the roads at Long Wall Road and Central Wan Chai in Admiralty. There were road blockages. At the afternoon, the protesters were swarming to Lechko from all directions. Well, at the beginning it was peaceful. They were singing songs and shouting slogans. However, some of them start from midday at the construction site across from Lachiope and start prying bricks. And some of them enter the construction site moving the metal poles. At around 3, things turned for the worse. A large group of masked protesters with yellow or white helmets start insanely charging at the electrical complex, the CE's office, and his CGO, and the bricks they dug up have been shifted, and the metal poles they collected have been passed by hand to outside Lechko. They have been throwing these objects in the direction of the police. Well, the police will simply maintain order with a minimal amount of gear. So very soon, they were not able to withstand the rioters' attacks in form of bricks, metal barricades, and metal poles. And we keep retreating from just outside the Lechko protest area and keep retreating backwards and all to the protest area, and now the area under the drum, which is just below this chamber. I saw it myself on the 5th floor balcony, and it sent chills down my spine. At the end, the police retreated to below the drum. The protester would start attacking the front gates of Lechko. The police rearmed themselves and pushed back the protesters out to the traffic lanes outside Lechko. While they were attacking, and the rioters would commit extensive damage, the staff inside Lechko in turn including the aid for establishment members, the members' assistants, the Lechko staff. At around 4 o'clock, we saw the situation get dangerous and decided to evacuate. Well, in order to maintain the public order and stop this violent charging and to ensure the safety of the Lechko complex, the police, without any choice, have taken corresponding deployment and arrested the rioters involved. Like the Secretary for Security has said, that there were serious violent confrontation in Lechko, and the police have claimed that even though the public had a right to express their opinion, the police also had a duty to maintain public safety. It's simply in the public interest when the public is under violent attack, suitable steps have to be taken to remove such threat. this their duty to maintain law and order, and the police will come out to maintain law and order. As for the amount of use force to be deployed in order to be proportionate. And for the right to escalating the violence, the force used by the police should defy the proportionality principle to contain the violence. The rioters been hurling bricks. If the police simply thrown back the back bricks, would that be a proportionate response? Well, if the rioters have been hurling petrol bombs, should the policemen retaliate by tit for tat? Well, we need to use a strong force when dealing with curbing violence. For the reporters that have been hurt at the scene of the confrontation, well, in the view of the June 12th situation, the press will need to assess their own risk. In the face of all such unlawful and dangerous activities, their presence at the scene, well, shouldn't they need to be accountable for themselves? If they choose to take part, they have to be mindful of their own safety. Especially some of the participants were underage. They shouldn't be staying at all. They should leave immediately. While covering the protest, the press should be mindful of their own safety. Some media chose to stand between the police and the rioters, which was a very dangerous position. They should exercise their own professional judgment to see it was appropriate. Those bricks and tear gas and beanbag rounds couldn't differentiate the protesters and the press. That's why I advise that the press to be extra careful. In fact, that the police have been reminding the press with different channels. The top priority is now curbing the violence. And yet, the rioters are getting more violent. So in the name of renovation, they've been ransacking shops and assaulting people with different political opinions, been openly challenged the rule of law. To a very large extent, it has to do with the support of political forces, especially the opposition camp have been openly refused to denounce the violence on the streets, in some way encouraging and inciting street violence and playing as cheerleaders for the rioters. Why were the members of the public were hit by drain covers while attempting to clear roadblocks? Why the citizens were hit in the brick and killed while attempting to clearing roadblocks? Why people with different political opinions would cause themselves to be set alight and critically injured? Why we can't take pictures on the streets, and instead we need to surrender their phones to the rioters for inspection or even have their phones smashed? The rioters claim they are in a quest for freedom and human rights. Well, so everything is justified in the name of pursuing such ideals. And for those who are trying to disrupt social order, and acting without a sense of with impunity and inflicting damage, should they be called rioters? I see them as bandits.
面對
Hong Kong faces challenges both internally and externally. People's livelihood and our economy are being affected. I hope everyone in Hong Kong can work in concert with the police and let's say no to violence so we can ride out the storm together. We must stop the violence and chaos so that we can restore calm in Hong Kong. For the sake of ourselves and for our future generation, we must do so as to restore stability and prosperity of Hong Kong. With these remarks, I oppose all the motions. Mr. Shiu Ka-fai. Thank you, President. This morning, we are speaking on motions moved by Mr. Andrew WAN, Mr. Jeremy TAM, and also Mr. Shiu Ka-chun to set up a select committee to investigate into the 6/12 incident. Because of the case of Chang Tong Kai, the administration wanted to introduce the Fugitive Offenders Bill to deal with it, and then more than 1 million took to the streets on the 6th of June, and then we had June 12, and then 7/21 and 8/31, and I think all these incidents are related. On the 27th of June, in this chamber, I said a heartfelt sorry to everyone in Hong Kong, because on the 9th of June, although many people took to the streets to express their dissatisfaction, we at that moment wanted to go ahead with the introduction of the bill, and Mr. James Tan and Mrs. Selina Chow and Mrs. Miriam Lau, leaders and veteran members of this council from a political party have always reminded us to be careful. Back then, I felt that not many people would break the relevant bill, the provisions in the bill, and I've checked with many friends and people in Hong Kong. They all felt that they would not be caught. Anyway, whether it be 1 million or 0.6 million or 300,000 people taken to the streets, shouldn't we call halt if so many people weren't happy with the bill? And then we decided to press ahead, leading to a series of incidents, and I am very sorry. I once talked to an elder, and I said that would be very unlikely that somebody would be caught by the bill. And then the elder said to me that, well, Hong Kong people are worried that even if the chances are very, very slim, what should there be a case caught by the bill? And so in future, I will pay extra care in dealing with such matters. For the June 12 incident, as said by Mr. Wong Shiu Kwong, well, he retold what happened on that day. Pro-establishment members were prepared to return to the council because the situation did not allow, so we were waiting to return somewhere, and we were all watching live the events outside the council building. By and large, things were peaceful, and then around 3 p.m., at the demonstration zone out there, people started to throw bricks and metal poles or wooden planks at the police, and clashes started to happen. And then tear gas were fired, and that started the clashes. And that is also the theme of this motion. In fact, in a few days after June 12th, many people did not know whether it was the police or the demonstrators who took the initiative to attack the other party. So Mr. Wong Wing-ping said that he only saw police officers beating demonstrators, and protesters had not hurled bricks. However, according to footage by many TV stations and confirmed by many members of the public, I think the chronology of events I just said was correct, because many pro-establishment members and people were here. Now, if those protesters or rioters charged into the building, the consequence would be unimaginable. On the 1st of July, the police demonstrated what would happen if there were no police presence. We spent tens of millions of dollars on renovating this chamber. Well, on the 1st of July, there was damage to property, but I'm worried that the 12th of June could lead to casualties, and the police took decisive actions to stop the protesters from charging into the building, and what they did was correct in my view. But does that mean that no single police officer was in the wrong? Last week, we discussed a motion involving Mr. Junius Ho. And then I had prepared a speech, and I was discussing with my colleagues. In one case, 3 police officers arrested an elderly man, and then they beat up that elderly man when he was tied to a bed in a hospital ward. And I said, well, the police officers were wrong. And in another case, a certain man was beaten up, or 3 police officers hit the lower limbs of a man on the floor, and then the officer came to stop them. And I asked how come that could have happened. Perhaps earlier on, that man had attacked those police officers. So my friends said that on the 21st of July, the police arrived 38 minutes late. I was surprised to hear that, and I wonder how come the police came only 38 minutes later when there was a fight amongst so many people. Was it because they had to deploy manpower from Hong Kong Highland, or were there other special arrangements? Members of the public, as well as I myself, want to know the truth. And then my 2 friends dropped their jaws. They said, why? I thought you supported the police. I told them that I support the police if they enforce the law in accordance with the law. So why is Hong Kong in this state? Because many people feel that the government is condoning the behavior of the police. I think the police and the government would take things seriously. It's just that they have yet to investigate these cases. Now, for the case I just mentioned, 3 policemen beat a certain patient on a hospital bed. Would you say that he's correct? I don't think any legislator here will say that they were behaving properly. It's just that we haven't started the discussion, and today is a start. 2 weeks ago, I had a meal with friends, some of them from the so-called yellow camp, some from the blue camp. And then the former scolded the black cops, and the other side called demonstrators cockroaches. One side, won't you call those thuggish police? And the other side asked me, won't you call them cockroaches? Someone an overseas friend said the Hong Kong people are rioters. I said, how come you say that? He said, because they are hurling drinks, hurling bricks around. And I told him, well, we have riots in Hong Kong, but not all Hong Kong people are rioters. And as for the police, there might be members of the police that were not up to standard, but the majority of them were proper. Now, as for cockroaches, I've never used this term. There are people who are rioters, but not all of them are rioters. We should not use terms like cockroaches or thuggish police to describe the other party. Hong Kong is so polarized, and these remarks are not going to help. If there are police officers who had performed not so properly and who have even violated the laws, well, we have the rule of law in Hong Kong. And if there are protesters who acted like rioters, we can just arrest them. Now, if we continue this bickering in Hong Kong, then there can be no future for us. The conflicts between the two camps are getting more intensified because they are always condoning members of their own parties. And I asked my so-called yellow friend, is it correct for the protesters to set fire on that man? And my blue camp friend said, then why haven't you censored him? And he said, I don't have the responsibility, the opportunity. And then the yellow friend asked the blue friend, do you support police officers beating up protesters? And he said, no. So there is no need to argue. We can just discuss issues. As we all know, our economy is in a recession. More than 1,000 restaurants will fold up, and for my retail sector, thousands of retail outlets will close down. So we should not yell at one another. We should discuss and find a way out. Otherwise, we will have more people unemployed. At the end of the day, we talk about the 5 demands. First, they would like the bill to be withdrawn. That's done already. Second, they want to set up an independent or committee of inquiry. Well, even the C is talking about an independent review committee. I've forgotten the term she used. I'd like to remind the CE. Well, people asked you to withdraw the bill and you said you were suspended. Perhaps the two were just the same, but then when the public do not trust you, just a minor difference in what you said could cause a problem. So people want a committee of inquiry. You should set up one to pacify. And as for to withdraw the characterization of a riot, now there were a few rioters here and fighting, and there were hundreds of people there singing hymns, and you call them rioters as well, then of course they'll be angry. Now, in the future, you should have loud hailers to ask people to leave first. If you want to fire tear gas, you just shoot 1 or 2 rounds so that people have a way to disperse. If you bundle thousands of people together, of course they'll be angry. We may have 100 protesters or so who are breaking the law, and if you bundle them up with all present, people will be angry. And if you fire a lot of tear gas, everyone present will be affected, and then they will be very angry. So you should be very careful in this in the future. And as for universal suffrage, well, we had a chance. If the constitutional reform was passed, we could have universal suffrage now. And as for acquitting all the people arrested. Now we have to be very careful. If we do not prosecute them in future, there may be rioters who come out to fight and cause chaos. Do you want to acquit all of them? Now, over 6,000 have been arrested, many of which are students. I don't know how to handle the situation. Lastly, people often ask me whether I would support having an independent inquiry. Now, if let's say if your company has been vandalized, of course you have to investigate. The whole thing is very clear. It started with Chen Tong Kai. But if your office is still on fire, how can you start the investigation? You have to put out the fire first. Yes, we must launch an investigation, but do not just target the police. Everyone should be the subject of the investigation. Thank you.
Dr. Helena Wong, President. So I've heard the loyalists speak, especially the speech of Houghton Chow. I feel it necessary to respond. Of course, I would like to say I support the motions moved by three Pandams, Mr. Andrew WAN, Mr. Jeremy TAM, and Dr. KWOK, in respect of the incident outside this council on the 12th of June 2019, the setting up of a commission of inquiry, and also to ask the commissioner to come attend our meetings and produce relevant documents and evidence. On that day, I was also I was also at the scene, the Tim May Road and Tim Wah Road. But if you listen to the loyalists, it seems that we have all mixed up what happened on different days. And I wonder why the president didn't stop them. They were talking about what happened in a general way in the past 6 months. So many loyalists blame what happened on the 12th of June for everything that happened. For example, a person was set on fire with inflammable liquid, and a cleansing worker was killed by a throwing brick. Someone used arrows and petrol bombs. All these didn't happen on the 12th of June, although they paint a very grotesque picture. We know on the 12th of June, what happened was due to the extradition bill controversy and the dissatisfaction of a great number of people. On the 9th of June, 1.03 people took to the street to object to the bill getting the second reading a few days later. And we all know why there was no bills committee. We are talking about 1.03 million people taking to the street. If it happened in any city or around the world, I think the government would step down very, very quickly. There will be a reorganization of the government if this happens to any city. On that day, when 1.03 people took to the street, there was no violence. It was totally peaceful. So why did the SAR government and the loyalist members insisted on getting the bill voted on the 12th of June? Why did the government and the loyalists ignore public opinion and And why did they think that these protesters, 1.03 of them, didn't count, and their views didn't count? So there was the peaceful protest on the 9th of June, and their protest was ignored. Their aspirations was not met. And then on the 12th, a large number of people surrounded this council. Did anything like what Mr. Holden Chow said happened? Did anyone use petrol bombs? None. There's none. But a lot of tear gas was used. So please do not edit what happened on different days and all attributed them to the incident on the 12th of June. Yes, there were small-scale conflicts with the police. There were some people throwing some bricks, just a few bricks. And what weapons did they have? The only thing that they had would be umbrellas, very familiar tool of Hong Kong people during the umbrella movement. So the only weapons they had on that day were umbrellas, and those were used for self-defense, for self-protection. And that is when the police use pepper spray and tear gas. They would use the umbrellas to protect themselves. Most of the people who gathered outside this council at Tim May Road, Tin Wah Road, and Harcourt Road, as far as we could see, I would say there were more than 100,000 people. They were peaceful protesters. Don't attribute the small-scale conflicts in the demonstration area of this council to all protesters and call everyone a rioter. What happens did the police use? Well, a lot. There were a lot of weapons. There were a lot of weapons used. I was there in the afternoon. Some people asked electrical members to come down because they wanted someone to mediate. And Mr. Andrew WAN and I went to the locations where they said mediation would be required. It's a Tin Wah Road. And before we arrived, there should have been some conflict. And the protesters there were holding umbrellas and nothing else. When Mr. Andrew WAN and I went there, we were not equipped with anything, any gear. It was less than a month since I had my eye operation. I didn't have goggles, and I don't have any mask, nothing. My eyesight was not fully restored. We were accompanied by our assistants, and then we have a loud hailer. And then we went to a place where there was a standoff at Tin Wah Road. We told the police very clearly when we arrived that we were Helena Wong, Andrew WAN, and Nam Chok Ting, electrical members. We asked the police to remain calm, and we also asked the protesters, the people there, to remain calm. We wanted a peaceful protest. We didn't want any conflict, and we didn't want anyone getting hurt. When we told them that we were electrical members, Helena Wong, Andrew WAN, and Nam Chok Ting, we didn't have any weapon. I was given an umbrella, and now I didn't want the police to think that I would attack them with the umbrella, so I unfold the umbrella. It was not a fighting scene when we arrived. Why didn't they listen to electrical members? And then they started to use pepper spray, not a small canister. It was a big spraying device that they used. And I couldn't have time. I didn't have time to open the umbrella. Was the force used reasonable? For this incident, Mr. Andrew WAN and I and Lam Chua-Ting have complained to the police, but so far no investigation has been conducted according to our knowledge. And they were not identifiable. There was no ID. So when there was a conflict, some electrical members wanted to mediate, and as soon as we mentioned our names, they used the pepper spray on us. Why was it that they used the force like that? Can you call this reasonable use of force? Or if you try to ram their defense or use the umbrella to attack them, well, you may say it would be justifiable to use force on us, but we didn't. So the lawyers shouldn't try to frame up different people. On that day, no one threw any petrol bomb. On the 12th of June at Timor Road, that's the reckless use of force on people by the police, and of course we were hurt after we were sprayed on, and these rioters, in the eyes of the loyalists, used some solution to flush my eyes, and I wanted to withdraw to this council building to clean up what remained on my body and my clothes. When we returned to Timor Road from Timor Road, what happened then? Well, we have a whole full team of Raptor officers, and they threw the tear gas grenades all over the place. When we wanted to return to the council building, the police had locked up the door, so we couldn't enter the building, and while outside we had to face the tear gas. It was just like a battleground. What have we done wrong? What had the peaceful protesters done wrong? Why was there the need to use so much tear gas? And then they tried to use tear gas from both sides of the protesters. Many people were forced to enter Civic Tower. Of course, they couldn't enter the electrical building. Not even electrical members could do that. And we haven't yet find time to pursue the matter with the Electrical Commission because there was no red alert. So who held the key on that day? The police or Electrical Commission staff? Why was it that the police didn't open the door for us? So we need to investigate the whole incident. Timor Road, what happened on the 12th of June should be investigated, and we have to find out the police strategy. What was the strategy? To disperse the protesters or to pursue them and arrest them? We enjoyed the rights to hold peaceful protests. Why were the peaceful protesters, treated in such a manner by the police? Who gave the orders? Mr. Wu Chi-wai, our party chairman, was also at teammate role. He asked to see the commander there. Where was the commander? Yes, he was there, but he wouldn't like to meet Mr. Wu Chi-wai. They thought that they were in the right, that they wouldn't talk to anyone. It's just like when we want to challenge the use of tear gas or the use of pepper spray, where we were attacked as a result. And I would say that the loyalists have got the time of different scenes mix up. And then they also accuse the Pandems for refusing to distance themselves from those who are rioting. We must set up a commission inquiry, find out who did what. And still, the loyalists have refused to go along with the idea of setting up COI. Then all the government has suggested is to set up a review committee. All these problems are caused by the loyalists and the government. We want an investigation properly.
Mr. Kenneth Leung, 2 of the motions today are moved under the Legislative Council Powers and Privileges Ordinance to set up a select committee. The other one is moved according to BL 73, 5, and 10 in order to summon the Commissioner of Police. All 3 of them have to do with the June 12 incident. I think that is a very symbolic day of this movement, and I will stick to these motions. I will be talking about June 12 and what happened before. And please do not mix up what happened after June 12 in order to interpret what happened on June 12. And I will only be talking about what happened until 12 midnight on June 12. And I would try to prove that June 12 alone would warrant the setting up of a select committee. Last week, I saw a group of NGO members from South Korea, and they are still pursuing abnormal deaths a few decades ago, and they have done so for over 30 years. I don't know why we can let this go easily. Of course, the culprit is this term of government. It took a few months to write the extradition bill, and I said many, many times that actually there was no broad consultation, due process was not followed. You did not listen to the public, and academics, professional bodies, and the business community had already registered grave concerns which were unprecedented. All chambers of commerce thought that the bill would do so much harm to Hong Kong as an international business hub. Unfortunately, before the bill was studied or scrutinized by a bills committee, and before any genuine consultation with the public for at least 3 months, and there was no public consultation report, but the bill was brought to the council, the executive pressurized us to pass the bill before the end of June. That is unacceptable. It is just not implementable. The culprit is the administration. If this select committee could be set up, one of the things it should look into is why, in terms of consultation, collecting public opinion, and in pushing forward the bill, the administration only worked behind closed doors, and not just officials, but executive council members as well. They should be held accountable. They should reflect upon the incident and accept investigation. The administration cannot shirk its responsibility. Talking about June 12, together with other pandemics, At as early as 7 a.m., we gathered at the antechamber to prepare ourselves for the resumption of the second reading debate, and we tried to discuss how we could resist the evil law. On that day, there was to be a gathering for which a letter of no objection was issued, and that would be in front of CITIC Tower. Of course, during the small hours, members of the public were gathering around the electrical complex, because after all, this was a major issue that aroused the concern of the public. Of course, the assembly was held in a peaceful manner. Many NGOs, members here, and other people who were concerned all spoke up. The atmosphere was extremely good. At about 1 p.m. on that day, there would have been over 100,000 people gathering here, and the order was very good. But then, unfortunately, at 2 p.m., there were small conflicts breaking out here and there. But we can't say that the police used appropriate force to keep order, because we saw hundreds of tear gas rounds, rubber bullets, so on and so forth, and also sponge grenades that were shot everywhere. We didn't know why that was the case. Why did the police have to use that extent of force? We should investigate to see whether the police were taking orders from the administration that the second reading debate must be resumed on the 13th of June. Was there such a deadline? Was there an order saying that at 9 a.m. on 13th of June, everybody should be cleared away and the meeting should resume? That would be one of the directions of the investigation. Plus, I'm only talking about that particular day, those 10 hours, and I will not talk about what happened later, like not wearing your UI, and especially the Raptors. Well, that happened in July. And you said that if you would show your UI, you would be doxxed. But the thing is, shouldn't you have any online security? Who should know the UI of police officers? If only 20 people within the police force would know what those UIs meant, then who would have leaked the information? Unless you are engaged in anti-terrorist work or doing undercover work, you should always show your UI. If you think the present UI is a problem, then perhaps you can scramble the UI and still let us identify the police officers, because that is something we can't do now, President. And also, there are other things that can be avoided. Why do you want to manhandle arrested protesters? Why do you kneel on the protesters' back, neck, and head while the protesters' hands are already tied on their back? I have never seen this before. Now you are using your knee to press on the body of an arrested person. Undersecretary, maybe you would care to explain this. And then from 2 p.m. to 6 p.m., there was so much chaos. A lot of the Democratic Camp members who were not able to enter the electrical building, and they saw that the police were using our space within the complex. According to the Electrical Commission and our protocol, the police can come in with the permission of the Commission and utilize our space. But on that day, there was no information whatsoever. Some members told me that even members' offices were utilized by the police. Why was that so? Our assistants or electrical staff should be able to use their offices for work, but then how come the police could take over their offices and rooms? And I'd like the Undersecretary to explain the justifications for that. I hope there could be explanations about all these aspects. If you can't give any explanation, then I would say we must have an independent investigation committee. June 12 alone would warrant the setting up of such a committee. On the 9th of June, 1.03 million people marched in a rational and peaceful manner. But then, just before midnight, the administration issued a statement said, okay, thank you for being peaceful, but sorry, we are going to resume the second reading debate of the bill as scheduled. That statement was totally irrational to the public, and I also heard from many civil servants asking why the administration adopted such an attitude and ignored a very strong view expressed by over 1 million people. Even civil servants thought that that was quite unimaginable. If on the night of the 9th of June you announced that the bill would be withdrawn, we would not have seen what happened in the last 6 months. Just think about what happened in these 6 months. Why did you not do the right thing there and then? And our investigation would be to check what you had in mind at that time. Is it that you had some political plans within your mind that could not be revealed? That is why you ignore people's views. And then number 3, I think we should investigate our President and the Secretary General. Over 20 members were here sitting, waiting for the meeting to start, but the President and the SG were nowhere to be found, and they could not be contacted. I find that very strange. This is our home ground. We are legislators. We think that the Council should be a solemn and dignified place. But then on that day, we did not receive a lot of information other than the Secretariat telling us every hour that we might have to delay the meeting, and then until after 6 p.m., we were told the meeting was cancelled. Why did you not cancel the meeting at 9 a.m.? And then why is it that you went to another place without us knowing? There was information asymmetry. Different members received different information. The President and the Secretary General had the responsibility to explain to us why there was information asymmetry. The loyalists said that it was our responsibility to hold a meeting. Why did you not come back at 7:30 to wait for the meeting to start? We did not see any of you. And then at noon, at this council chamber and around the building, we could only try our very best to minimize the possible confrontation. That was what we did for the entire day that day, but we did not know what was happening to the operation of the council and what was to be done and where were you. Those are all directions for investigation. I hope we can appoint an independent inquiry to be chaired by a judge. And the legislature and the administration should subject themselves to the investigation. And we are only talking about June 12. Of course, if the COI has to investigate so many social issues, well, there are other motions on July 21st and August 31st. But the importance of June 12 is that it was the beginning of this social issue because you ignored the public, the business sector, and the international community so that we had this continuous social unrest for 6-7 months. If you think there are many other issues which could be inquired into only in a few years' time, and maybe you want to set up a review committee to look into deep-seated conflicts, but we must investigate into June 12. We must do it, so I submit, President.
Dr. Junius Ho. President, this is but one of the many motions the opposition camp are moving for setting up of select committee to investigate into related matters, and also for officials to produce documents, etc. Now, I don't mind an investigation, and if we are to do so, it must be comprehensive, and we should not just single out June 12. But of course, the opposition camp likes to play with figures. In the past 6 months, this is not just the 6/12 incident. Since the introduction of the Fugitive Offenders Bill, I think we should also look at the political situation in Hong Kong and in neighboring countries, and also in the international arena. And therefore, I like Dr. Priscilla Leung's motion, and that is to conduct a full review of what has happened since June. Why just 612? They criticized the president for inappropriate handling, and that only a handful of people were hurling bricks at the demonstration zone, and in the outskirts of the demonstration area, everything was okay, and it was wrong for the police to use tear gas. Now, given the amount of public resources and money we are going to spend on a committee of inquiry to find out the truth, then if we really want to find out the truth, well, in February there was a public consultation on the introduction of the bill, and then later in February, the U.S. consulate in Hong Kong openly discussed this matter against the background of the U.S. mainland trade row. He was actually commenting on the Fugitive Offenders Bill, and members from the opposition camp have visited the U.S., who foot the bill for their air tickets. They went to invite the U.S. to sanction Hong Kong over the bill. All these started in February. So how come opposition members were just in a piecemeal manner talked about the 12th of June, the 21st of July, the 1st of August, and turned a blind eye to all other things? I agree that when everything has settled, we should find out the cause for the events, and also the deep-seated conflicts in Hong Kong, and whether there was any incitement with the protests in Taiwan. And then some traveled a very long way. Some didn't go to Beijing, didn't go to Taiwan, where the liaison officers to communicate with them. They took a plane all the way to the U.S. They went to the East Coast and then the West Coast and then to Europe. What is happening there? President, I agree that there should be an investigation, but I've said a number of times that this is a color revolution. The anti-extradition row has been called, and anti-extradition to China row, and then there have been so many violent events. And the standpoint of the Pan-Democrats are just like the yellow media. They will just point the cameras at law-abiding police officers, blaming them for this and that. How often have they turned to see what the rioters were doing? I'm not saying that which party is perfectly correct or not. Now, if we want an investigation, let's have a comprehensive one. Now, they would also like to investigate into the shake of hands with the rioters by Dr. Julius Ho. Now, they were hurling petrol bombs in Taiwan, and then when they returned home, they spotted Julius Ho shaking hands with white-clad people. Well, I don't mind. More debate, more truth. They have miscalculated the situation. They thought that there was no one to support Julius Ho. Well, why? Why didn't people support Julius Ho? Because if we want an investigation, let's have a comprehensive one. You made a mountain out of molehill in Julius Ho's matter. Well, you make a big fuss out of a minor point in a person's life. Now, this is always their tactic. If you want an investigation, please have a very comprehensive one and find out the whole truth so that we will honor our pledge to uphold the basic law. But this is not what they are doing. They have disproportionately exaggerate a certain minor point. They use sentimental and sensational remarks. This is the strength of the opposition camp. They don't know how to do something constructive. Of course, you can be very sensational if you criticize another party. Now, I'm criticizing you, but while I criticize you, I am trying to right wrongs, and I want to introduce reforms. All right, you want an investigation, then it should not be just on June 12, July 21st, August 31. If you have courage, withdraw all these motions. Instead, you should probe into things that started on the 18th of February until this weekend. I'm sure there will be further petrol bombs and black-clad rioters doing vigilantism. They will vandalize shops, smash glass windows and shop windows of restaurants. Claudia Mo said that she would not cut ties with the rioters. No disunion, no censoring of these rioters. It's not that because you're the police or you are a hero, you can use violence. Alan Leung, senior counsel, a former legislator, should support the rule of law. But he did say that sometimes violence may be the only means to resolve a problem. I'd like to know when he made those remarks, was he speaking the capacity of a lawyer, a friend of the court, or a revolutionary? Of course, if you are a revolutionary, you can resort to all means, but he was rather unclear. He did not make himself clear. What he said would mislead not just the public, but the future masters of society. These young people are passionate to serve the community. Well, we have all been young. I agree that young people are very straightforward and they have the courage to do whatever they want. But if we do not give them proper guidance, we'll be ruining their lives. Well, of course, it is not your son or yourself that is at stake, right? People mourn after the HKUS student as if he were your child. But this is fake compassion. This is fake. You are hypocritical. One life lost is one too many in Hong Kong. But you always pass your judgment even before a proper trial. You like to exaggerate a minor point. It started all the way from Martin Lee decades ago, even as he is now old and wobbly, he is still using the same rhetorics. Please do not hypnotize our young people. You want to investigate into June 12? Yes, it is a classic example of violence. You want the 5 demands. You want the bill to be withdrawn. Well, eventually, the CE acceded to your request. You ask for release of the lawbreakers. What is your basis? What authority, what power do you have to make such a request or demand? And the characterization of a riot. If you're not happy with the crimes ordinance, well, since you've been arrested, you have your chance to defend yourselves in front of the court. You have a party of barristers. Please come back to the motion. Well, I am talking about the 5 demands. Well, we're talking about the June 12th incident. Don't forget that the 5 demands came after the June 4th incident. The 4th demand was to set up a committee of inquiry. And I think this is exactly what this motion is about. And they only want to investigate the police. Helena Wang was brilliant. She said she could only remember a bunch of protesters using violence at the demonstration zone. That's why I always call her Woolly Woolly now. And the 5th demand was for Carrie Lam to step down, but now they've changed it to expedite the introduction of universal suffrage. The CE is a very strong lady. She pressed ahead after the 12th of June incident. However, on the 13th of June, Marco Rubio, a U.S. congressman, a senator, activated the Hong Kong Democracy and Human Rights Act. And then the Executive Council was so scared. And then on the 15th of June, she came out to tell us that the bill was suspended. And then at 3 p.m., Sham Shikin came out to say to say that he was not satisfied, and then he called upon people to come out on the 16th of June to a march. Well, I don't think I can gather enough friends to tea within such a short period of time. I think all these are agents. We have to find out who these people are. Thank you.
Mr. Chu Hoi-dik. Thank you, President. Well, you have been quite relaxed about the rules in this debate. You only try to ask Mr. Junius Ho to stop after he has spoken for 12 minutes. Let me explain why I support the motions moved by Mr. Andrew WAN, Mr. Jeremy TAM, and Mr. Lam Chok Ting. Why do we want to investigate into the incident on the 12th of June? The grounds are very narrowly based because we saw on the media coverage that the police officer beat up some protesters who are already subdued. You know, that's obviously a criminal act. There were 7 police officers imprisoned for doing exactly the same. So on the 12th of June, when a lot of people witnessed that happening right before our eyes, that's why we want to set up a select committee and also an independent commission, because we do not accept that that the police can be guilty of a vigilante act and suffer no consequences. If we allow that to happen, we will be a police state like what we are now. That's why we want to investigate into this incident. And then the second question is this: why do we want to set up a select committee with the power to summon the relevant people to testify? It's because other channels cannot achieve what we want to achieve. First, capital. I'm a complainant. I've been beaten up by a raptor police officer. And once you arrive at the capital, you know your complaint will be futile. They will ask you who beat you up. How can you tell? Capital is staffed with police officers. So it would be up to the police officers to investigate what fellow police officers did. Unlike the case involving the superintendent, Mr. Zhu Gengwei, so you cannot get things started. And if you don't know the ID number of the officer, and if you have no video clip showing that someone was beaten up, and then the investigator would see if it warrants a prosecution, and the IPCC is powerless over this. So now the IPCC is saying that they are doing some fact-finding studies, 612, June 12, August 31st, and other incidents. And the chairman of IPCC said it very clearly. IPCC does not enjoy the investigation powers, and therefore, with the support of the CE and the Commissioner of Police, we are going to do this We were going to do the fact-finding missions. So we returned to step number 1. We returned to the police. No ID number. You can't tell who it was or who they were, and you cannot really do this. How can IPCC, which has no investigative power, does the investigation? And I can't understand why Mr. Nguyen, the chairman, said they would be able to investigate. A few days ago, when he met with some reporters, she admitted that I'm just, I quote, I'm just a small wheel, a small potato, a small character. So the chairman of IPCC admitted that he was a small potato. How can we count on him then? And then, fourthly, we had the CE saying that she would set up an independent review committee, and no sooner the CS4A, Mr. Jiang Kin-chung, said that the committee would not be targeting any individuals, but rather to uncover the deep-rooted conflicts. And the investigation was not about any particular individual. So that leads me to this same question. If you see these police officers wearing masks and beating people up, and if we are to get justice for this boy in the middle of the picture, how can we achieve that? So that's why we want to set up a select committee in this council, because other channels are not available. Why do we have to stress that it's a select committee? Because we need the power, we need the select committee to have the power of compulsion. We need to have statutory powers. Because the police officers whose responsibility we want to pursue are in the eye of the Commissioner of Police, the latest one, that they should not cooperate with us. Some records of an internal meeting between the Commissioner and his officers said this: police officers have no responsibility to attend meetings which has got nothing to do with law and order and which are unreasonable in that they would target police officers. So they're saying that it's not related to stopping violence and chaos. It's not about law and order. So I won't attend the meeting with such an objective in mind. That's why we have to compel them to attend the meeting, our meetings. And now the police are totally not afraid of the IPCC. There will be a Q&A between IPCC and police representatives. It's December. It's already after the 10th of December. And what were the questions put by the IPCC? They asked why the members of the Raptor teams had no ID numbers. And Ms. Meg Whiteman, the chief superintendent of KWOK, said that there was no space on the vest to display the new blue card. I think you are bored by the references for many months to the lack of ID number worn by Raptor teams. And they're still providing such sloppy answers to the same question. We must have the power to compel them to appear and to testify. Otherwise, they will break the law. And then the police have been raising the threshold for the purpose of pursuing responsibility. The Indonesian female Indonesian reporter was hurt in the eye. Her lawyer issued many letters, dozens of letters, to ask about the identity of police officers who used rubber bullets or the beanbag rounds there. On the 29th of June, I was on the 29th of September. Pepper spray was used by an unidentified police officers against me. I don't know his number, and I have no other choice but to go to the court. But who will pay for this? President, are you going to pay for this? Of course not. That's the way that they try to minimize the possibility of getting them to be held accountable. You have listened to the loyalists for saying so many things. Some people would be bored that they would switch off their TV set, or they would not understand what they are driving at. So I would summarize their tactics. There are only 4 tactics to make sure that these vigilante officers would not be pursued. The first is to generalize everything. Mr. Junis Ho has just demonstrated this. Why don't you also investigate into the acts of other people, the Americans? As Mr. Matthew Cheung has said, we have to look into the deep-rooted conflicts. Don't target individuals. So you try to smudge and generalize everything. Second tactic, to complicate simple things. The forte of a bureaucracy. The people have been listening to the various bodies, IPCC, CAPO, International Expert Panel, the Independent Review Committee. Mentioning the names alone would use more than 30 seconds of your time. We want to bring these officers to justice who committed wrongful acts, unlawful acts. That's the direct request. A very clear aspiration. And we've got no answer. And then the third tactic is to delay as far as possible. Let's wait that the fact-finding is completed by the IPCC, and the fact-finding investigation will be in phases. The first one will be in January, and then when the last phase is out, it would likely be the summer. And then, of course, we need to deal with the international expert panels. And then what we can expect is that they wouldn't start to do what this picture suggests that we have to do to find these rogue police officers. We won't be able to do that before Mrs. Carrie Lam completes her term. So this is a tactic of procrastination. Why do we need to investigate into this? Why do we need to compel police officers to come out to face this council and the public? And we also have to understand the underhand tactics adopted by the loyalists to prevent these police officers from facing justice in the court or to be held accountable. Well, it's very clear, but we need to sum up the positions in a general way to facilitate public understanding. Lastly, I would like to respond to what Mr. Leung Chi-Chung has said. Mr. Leung has made this remarkable comment. Let's say you are right. Hong Kong is ruled by a totalitarian regime. Even if that was the case, what are the pandemics leading Hong Kong to? Are we not free and democratic enough? Do we have the freedom to be an arsonist? Well, yes, Mr. Leung has pointed out the crux of the problem. We are facing the threat of the totalitarian rule of China. We need to have a government of the people, for the people, by the people. So my question for Mr. Leung Chi-Cheng is this: what is the totalitarian regime in China trying to lead Hong Kong to?
郭家麒議員同埋官員再次發言，然後
I would invite Mr. Jeremy TAM and Mr. Andrew WAN to speak, and then the motion will come to an end. Mr. Jeremy TAM.
都聽到唔同嘅議員都講咗好多嘢，
We have heard many members speak,
究竟會講啲咩呢？
and we are very concerned about what the loyalists said. Yesterday, not many people spoke, but this morning there were quite a few. I think they spoke on behalf of their political parties because they did not want to mention what happened on June 12. They would like to sweep everything under the carpet. Actually, that's what the SARG have been doing, whether it's June 12 or the umbrella movement in 2014. Therefore, a lot of things are now under the carpet. What we saw on June 12 was that on that day there was a conflict, but then that didn't end there. There was the deterioration of the issue of police brutality. That was the beginning. Without June 12, I believe the community would have a very different impression of the police. No one could imagine what happened in these last few months. We saw something rather interesting. What happened actually on June 12, especially within LegCo? It's still a mystery. Even today, even so much time has passed, I still don't know how the decision was made on that day. From different members, I heard just a little information. Mr. Michael Lok said he came back, he said, after 8 a.m. he could not enter the area around LegCo because there was a big crowd. Then Dr. Lo Wai Kwok said it was about 8 a.m. that he arrived, and there was the PWSC meeting scheduled, but he could not come in, so the PWSC meeting was cancelled. And then I really wanted to know where they went afterwards, but they didn't say. Where did they go? Because the president at that moment did not announce how the meeting was to be arranged. Nothing was said. We got an SMS saying that the meeting would not start yet. We should wait for notification. And then what happened? Conflicts started. Tear gas rounds were fired. We saw all that for ourselves, didn't we? We saw there was tear gas used. And then naturally there was this assumption. Where were the loyalists? Where was the president? Did they have an understanding that no matter what the police would do, they would definitely want to come back to LegCo to pass the bill? Is it because of that? So tear gas was used wantonly outside CITIC Tower and also beneath the chamber here, and also protesters were beaten up? Would it be that the culprit was not the police, but was it you, President? Was it you who said that the meeting should not be cancelled no matter what, so that you could bulldoze through the extradition bill? Was that really happened? Is it because the loyalists wanted to support CE, Carrie Lam, and they wanted to pass the bill, so the police forced their way in? We don't know, because the president said nothing. The loyalists said nothing. Where were they in those few hours? Is it as the rumor that was passed around that you all went to a police station. So the police could fight a way out for you to come back. And then you could push the bill through in no time. If that's the case, then the responsibility is not only on the administration or the police, but the loyalists who are not here, of course, none of them are here, they also have a big responsibility. Is it because of that so they didn't want the investigation to be conducted? Mr. Junius Ho, who's not here, said a moment ago, why should we mention only June 12? Is it that there is something you don't want to look into, therefore you only concentrate on June 12? Well, I think he did not even know the basics of what happened. On the agenda of the 3rd of July 2019, there was to be the debate of this motion, and that is after June 12, many members wrote in to propose this particular motion, and it was scheduled for the 3rd of July. When we submitted our letters, when we proposed the motion, July 21st, August 31st had not happened. Did you have a time machine? Of course you didn't. So next time, don't make a fool of yourself and say why we only investigate into August 31st and not other events. Look at the chronology. Mr. Ho had no logic. And Mr. Michael Look, let us see whether he has any basic logic. I wrote down what he said. He said, the Civic Human Rights Front had an assembly outside CITIC Tower, and it told us to run into CITIC Tower and not go away on Tinmei Road, and that is why there was a stampede almost, and that is why the police used tear gas. Well, is it that he had a brain problem or a chronology problem? What happened on Tinmei Road at that time? It was closed. The police were using tear gas. If people had not gone into CITIC Tower, where could they have gone? I don't know what TV station he watched or what he was doing, or was he hiding in a police car so he could dash into the chamber all of a sudden? Why would he say that the Civic Human Rights Front did not ask people to leave by Tinmei Road but go into CITIC Tower? Well, he had no idea whatsoever of the situation on the ground then, and he was really, I don't know what he was saying. Then Mr. Leung Chi-Chang, he said there were no guns used because no one was shot. It was only tear gas, he said. Well, does he think that tear gas could not kill? At least it could blind. It seems he is saying tear gas is no big deal. If tear gas is correctly used, it should not be a problem. But no. The aim is to use tear gas not to create smoke or to disperse the crowd, but to aim at the person. And the tear gas was used as a live round to hit at the person. And then we heard Priscilla Leung say, politically, they lost the DC election. People who cannot do any review should not be in LegCo. I don't know whether she was saying this to the Honorable Regina Ip. There are people in this council who do not know how to do a review, saying that our votes are more than the Liberal Party. I mean, it's embarrassing. Well, next time you file 100 candidates and you lose all the seats, then you can have more votes than DAB, and then if you file 200 candidates, you may have more votes than the CCP. It's so ridiculous. And I failed to follow the logic. She thinks she has no problem, but she must be aware that there are 0 seats for the New People's Party. and Mr. Michael Teen, who left NPP and set up the round table. He himself lost, but his party got 2 seats, and he won over the NPP, but still Regina Ip thought that it was the administration's fault, and she did not have to do a review. Of course it was the fault of the administration, but you loyalists banded together with the administration. And then come the 16th of June, Priscilla Leung said the situation was overpowering the people. And then they said, now we are not exactly in support of the extradition bill. But then she did not really think enough about it. Whether a bill is a good bill or an evil bill, it should not depend on whether there is a movement or whether people come out to object it. You have to see whether the bill itself is problematic. Don't put the cart before the horse. Carrie Lam is always wrong in that many people came out, therefore she would suspend or withdraw the bill. That is only a way to make amends. The correct thing to do is not to have proposed the bill in the first place, because it contravened the one country, two systems and also the preservation of Hong Kong's systems. Now, where is the logic? And then, as Mr. Eddie Chu was saying, even today the IPCC is still talking about the unique identification numbers of the police. Too bad. It's really very sad. And then I can tell him that on June 13th, there was this complaint about UI, and after half a year, last week, the capo told me that the investigation report was completed and it would be forwarded to IPCC. And I'm only talking about the UI. Don't talk about more complicated matters like the San Oak Link Holding Center or the Polytechnic University, which was more recent. You think those would be investigated into? You invited the 5-member international panel and you asked us to listen to the international experts. What did they say? They said, you just didn't have any investigative power. You had no power to summon witnesses and you could not do what you would like to do. And then what did the loyalists say? Well, they are international experts. They don't know much about Hong Kong. But you invited them. And then when these experts said something you didn't like, you would say they did not know Hong Kong well. And still, you don't think you have a problem. Or did you think that the international experts would act as rubber stamps like the loyalists? Well, just write anything and say that everything is okay. From June 12 until today, the loyalists were giving a candle to the devil, and then suddenly they want to dissociate with the administration. But it's not really possible because you were a part of it all. Now, they have totally dissociated with this debate because no one of the loyalists is here. And you will be further abandoned. In fact, even within the administration, there are many opposition voices, but Carrie Lam did not listen. As I said, June 12 was the start of police brutality because you did not come out to tell them they were wrong. You condoned them. And as something as simple as the UI, you allowed them to do whatever they wanted. A few days ago, suddenly the Raptors had this UI on them. Did they have a new uniform? No. So it's obvious that someone issued an order or tolerated them or condoned them for not wearing their UI. Who was it? The PGO was not changed. Don't tell me the PGO is now different and now they have a white card or blue card. What about on that day? Who made the decision? Who told them? We have no account of that even today. Every time we asked, they said there was no space for it. If that's the case, why they have it now? Is it like money in the bank? You might have the deposit a year ago and this year you have used it all up. Or is it that the UI is just a sticker, and every time you wash your uniform, it is destroyed. That is unreasonable. Every day at 4 p.m., the police would repeat such lies. They distort the entire system and distort the public's knowledge. You are insulting the public. So I would urge members to support the motions moved by the few of us to have a thorough investigation of June 12. The meeting will be suspended until 2:30.